but it may be the most important street on earth, Wall Street. It's fueled some of the greatest economic expansions ever known. It's plunged millions into poverty and ruin. Now the thrill, the terror, the technique, and the technology of the stock exchange on Modern Marvels. Every business day, more than 1 billion shares change hands on America's major stock exchanges. Nearly $90 million worth of stock changes hands every minute. Brokers constantly scramble to do their clients' bidding in the battlefield of high finance.
The floor is a rather unique kind of place. It's a place where people have known each other many years. Each day get together to compete on behalf of clients they've never met.
A stock exchange is actually two markets in one. First, it's a place where a new company can raise millions or billions of dollars overnight by offering ownership of the business to hundreds of thousands of small investors. These pieces of ownership are called shares of stock. Second, the exchange is the place where people can sell their stock to someone else whenever they wish.
You could be in the airline business today, and you could be out of that, and you could be in the automobile business tomorrow. And that ability to enter and exit and get paid back for your investment in those shares creates a great market for the initial investment. People are more willing to put that money up if they know that sometime in the future they'll be able to sell out their interest and go on to the next best thing.
40% of American families own stock in U.S. companies either directly or through mutual funds and pension plans. The exchange lets people know how these companies are doing by allowing a free market to place a value on their stock.
Well, I like to say that a stock market is a market in information. I mean, it uses information from outside to evaluate companies, but then the process of the stock market creates new information by putting a price on things that everybody in the country can read.
The modern market is a tightly regulated and finely tuned institution. But this wasn't always the case. Centuries ago, investing in stocks was chaos. Ship captains offered part of their profits to those who'd share the risk of financing a trading voyage. These were all-or-nothing gambles. A ship might return with riches or might never return at all. The Romans sold stock as well for huge construction projects that were beyond the means of a single businessman. Stockholders made tidy profits by investing in companies that built roads and aqueducts for the government. Investing took a big step in the 1600s in Holland, home of the Dutch East India Company. Like the Greek seafarers before them, the Dutch needed capital for international trade. But this investment was different. People bought a stake in the company, not in a single voyage. This led to wild speculation because investors could sell their shares to one another over time. The price could rise or fall on the vaguest of rumors, spreading panic in the world's first stock exchange.
The people who lost the money were the nobles, the merchants, a class of people who, in effect, were the money people of the time who can afford to speculate. It didn't affect the economy. There was no problem there. And as far as the average person is concerned, when the crash came, he might have said to himself, it's a good thing it happened. These people deserve what I got. They're a bunch of gamblers.
The reputation of stockbrokers sunk even lower during the 1700s. In Paris, an escaped murderer sold stock. John Law swindled the public with worthless shares in fictitious gold mines. In London, brokers lured investors with stories of a secret device that could turn chickens into sheep. The value of these stocks would skyrocket. until reason took hold.
Nothing is being done, but the shares are becoming more and more valuable as time goes on. Eventually, one person says, how can these shares possibly be worth £5,000? It's ridiculous. And he starts selling. And then another person sells, and it goes to £4,000. And now a panic sets in, and the whole thing falls apart.
Despite the unscrupulous brokers, stocks helped make Europe the colonial and economic powerhouse of the world. They would soon do the same for America. Wall Street got its name when New York was a tiny colonial outpost. In 1653, Pilgrims built a wall to keep out Indians. 100 years later, the wall was gone. But the path that ran beside it had become the heart of New York's commerce and society. Here was the auction block for slaves, and the pillory for public humiliation. George Washington was sworn in as the first U.S. president on Wall Street in 1789. Wall Street was also where merchants gathered beneath a buttonwood tree to auction off stock in banks and mines, making a commission on every sale. This open-air market lasted until 1792, when 24 merchants signed a document known as the Buttonwood Agreement. The pact was an effort to avoid government regulation of street auctions. It also blocked newcomers from the business.
And a group of the auctioneers, the most powerful ones, say, you know, anyone's coming into this market. We're losing business to these people. So let's form an organization called the New York Stock and Exchange Board in that tavern over there. And we'll have a door, and we'll keep these people out.
The brokers met inside the Tontine Coffee House for 2 formal auctions per day. The public was not allowed. If you wanted to buy or sell stock, you had to hire a broker to do it.
What it did is it did one thing. It made the trading of stocks less public. So the public had less information about what was going on. In the open auction system, where it was everybody could hear, people knew more about what was going on.
These indoor sessions, where a central auctioneer sold stocks one by one, allowed brokers to regulate themselves to prevent fraud and abuse. Only reputable stocks were traded, and the sales were recorded. These procedures created an air of respectability.
You change something from, mere commerce of hawking wares on the street. You sort of put it indoors and got a certain group of people who knew each other. You're moving from a trade or just ordinary business to a profession.
During the auctions, prices were quoted in increments of 1/8 of a dollar, a holdover from the days when people carried Spanish mill dollars and cut them into pieces of 8. Only 30 companies were traded inside the exchange. Banks, cargo insurance companies, construction firms that built bridges and piers. But only a handful of fearless investors dared buy them.
Many people were afraid of stock, because if the company went bankrupt, the stock owners could lose everything. So stocks were for 2 kinds of people: outright speculators or people who try to take control of the company.
The struggle for respectability on Wall Street brought only limited success. With time, the trading of less reputable stocks resumed on the street among brokers who weren't allowed to join the exchange. Here, disputes were settled with fists. Big changes, though, were in store for Wall Street. America's westward expansion would soon spark an explosion of activity. And technology would speed up the pace of business beyond anyone's wildest dream. In 1789, the first government bonds were traded on Wall Street, $80 million worth, to pay for the recent war against England. The stock exchange will continue in a moment on Modern Marvels. Several legends describe How the terms bull and bear found their way to Wall Street. The most dramatic tale involves a style of bullfight in the old Wild West. A 1,000-pound grizzly would be chained to a stake in a bullfight arena. Then a bull would charge. The bull could win the contest by thrusting upward with its horns. The bear could survive by wrestling the bull down, breaking its neck. On Wall Street, bulls were brokers who expected stock prices to rise. Bears were traders who anticipated drops in the market. And many bears used the declines to outwit other investors.
In those days, if you were on Wall Street, you had a dark side. Wall Street was no place for amateurs. There was no federal government on Wall Street. The state government didn't have much to do. The rules are very few and far between. In other words, it was a jungle.
The bulls included colorful figures like Hetty Green, whose severe appearance and miserly character earned her the nickname the Witch of Wall Street. Green became the world's richest woman by investing in railroads. America's railroads were among the most ambitious engineering projects in history. Railroad stocks fueled the frenzy on Wall Street.
Up until the railroads, corporations were little mom-and-pop shops. They didn't need a lot of capital. But when you're building a big railroad, you need to assemble a lot of money. And at that point, the stock market became very important.
With shrewd rail investments, Hetty Green amassed a fortune of $100 million, the equivalent of nearly $2 billion today. Her advice to others was simple.
There is no great secret to fortune making. All you have to do is buy cheap and sell dear. Act with thrift and shrewdness, and be persistent. Hetty Green.
To accommodate the railroad boom, the New York Stock Exchange moved several times in search of larger quarters, settling in 1865 in a building near the corner of Wall and Broad. To create a pleasant atmosphere, the building's ventilation system wafted perfumed air across the crowded trading floor. To protect stock certificates, the basement housed hundreds of vaults. By 1870, the old system of auctioning stocks gave way to a free-for-all. Brokers roamed the floor, making deals throughout the day. In this crowd were ruthless marauders known as Wall Street Bears.
The markets in those days, particularly the stock market, was an arena for the gunslingers, the takeover artists, the robber barons. This was their playground, and that's where they ran prices of stocks up and down to suit whatever shenanigans they were trying to pull at the time.
The most notorious bear was a former store clerk who became the market's most detested raider.
Jay Gould was one of the most famous speculators in Wall Street. He was called the Mephistopheles, sort of the devil of Wall Street, because he was always looking out for number one and not really thinking so much about companies. That's what people say. I think he was also interested in building up the value of some companies, but he was a manipulator.
Gould earned his seat among the kings of Wall Street by mastering the short sale, a technique to make money when a stock went down in price. Gould would persuade unwitting investors to loan him their shares at a small rate of interest. He would immediately sell them at the exchange. Gould then published vicious rumors about the company in a newspaper he owned in order to drive its stock price down. He bought the shares back at the lower price and returned them to their owner. His profit was the difference between the price he received when selling and the price he later paid to buy the stock back. The fact that a company and its shareholders might be ruined in the process seemed of no concern to Gould. The bulls and bears made Wall Street a rambunctious place. The street itself remained a busy marketplace for the so-called curbstone brokers, who continued to trade the stocks of smaller companies out of doors until they formed the American Stock Exchange in the 1920s. The bull and bear struggle also made Wall Street dangerous. Every 20 years, the street would fill with investors panicked over a crash in prices. Sometimes the exchange was forced to close for days. The outbreak of World War I sparked a panic that closed the market for more than 4 months. In 1832, a simple device revolutionized the stock exchange. The telegraph allowed news from distant cities to flash across the United States. In the world of finance, where information is power, the telegraph was a godsend. The telegraph's inventor, Samuel Morse, opened a demonstration office near the stock exchange, charging brokers 25 cents to see his invention. Soon after, Wall Street was a tangle of telegraph wires. The telegraph turned New York into America's financial capital by eliminating the need for regional markets in other cities.
The telegraph makes it possible for New York to become a central marketplace. At one time, we had dozens of stock exchanges all over the country. There was a stock exchange in Albany, there was a stock exchange in Buffalo. But once the telegraph goes to Albany and Buffalo from New York, they disappear.
The stock ticker was the next innovation. Created in 1867, the ticker printed telegraph signals onto a narrow paper tape. The ticker brought up-to-the-minute prices to brokers throughout the nation. For the first time, people outside the exchange could tell what was going on. July 8th, 1889, another milestone. Issue number 1 of the Wall Street Journal, the price 2 cents. Charles Dow and Edward Jones raised the standard of financial journalism with their new publication. The most popular feature was the daily index of 12 stocks, known as the Dow Jones Industrial Average. By analyzing the performance of key companies such as American Sugar, U.S. Rubber, and General Electric, the Dow became a stock market barometer.
It made sense out of what was perceived as chaos. In the daily jumble of up an eighth and down a quarter, it was hard to tell whether stock prices generally were moving up or down. With the industrial average, you could keep your eye on the long-term trends and not be confused by the short-term static.
The ticker, the telegraph, and the Wall Street Journal were powerful tools that opened the world of stocks to the general public. The most powerful man in America was the son of a prominent banker who made his own mark in history as the undisputed king of corporate mergers. His name, J.P. Morgan. Morgan combined hundreds of independent railroads and factories into coast-to-coast monopolies. Morgan's greatest achievement came in 1901, when 9 companies joined forces to become U.S. Steel. It was the world's first billion-dollar corporation, with stocks so valuable, it boosted the Dow Jones average by 500%. J.P. Morgan was a stern, autocratic man who never gambled and based his decisions on business fundamentals. To protect his customers, Morgan insisted on a role in managing every company he created.
If he sold you a security, a stock in a railroad company, if the railroad company got into trouble, he would move in and try to improve the situation. He wouldn't say, well, you know, that's tough, you bought the stock and you know what the risks were, I'm done with it. No, he wouldn't. He would say, I sold you that security and I thought it was good. It turns out it's not so good now, so I'm going to get involved in that railroad and I'm going to try to make it good.
Morgan controlled 341 seats on the boards of more than 100 different companies. Investors respected Morgan, but the public did not. His railroad monopoly raised shipping prices, hurting farmers. Morgan supported child labor and opposed labor unions. President Teddy Roosevelt used antitrust regulations to bust up parts of Morgan's empire. But when Morgan died in 1913, he received a funeral befitting royalty. The stock exchange closed for 2 hours as his hearse passed by.
His death was treated like the death of a monarch. In other words, big funeral procession, front page news all over the world. Editorials, one editorial saying he was a monster, thank God he's dead. Another editorial saying the great age has passed and we have to find someone like him around. The only trouble was there was no one like Morgan. He was sui generis. He was just by himself.
Some hated Morgan so deeply that his company became the target of a terrorist bomb 7 years after his death. On September 20th, 1920, a wagon loaded with explosives killed 30 people and injured 100. The entrances to the Morgan Company and the New York Stock Exchange across the street were littered with bodies. The crime was never solved. Wall Street quickly recovered from the 1920 blast, but more shocks were ahead. The biggest boom market in history was coming. So was the biggest crash. In the early days of Wall Street, merchants kept an actual inventory of securities on hand, which they sold over the counter like any other product. The stock exchange will continue in a moment on Modern Marvels. America had never seen anything like the 1920s. World War I ended in victory. Factories were booming. Families had money to burn.
They go to the movies. They had a phonograph. The family might have had a car. All things are changing in that and getting better, and getting much better.
By 1920, the New York Stock Exchange, a private institution, looked more impressive than many government agencies. The exchange had torn down its building at the turn of the century to construct a larger one that projected an image of strength. The new trading floor was enormous. Each stock was now traded at a particular spot called a post. Steel stocks were clustered at one post, railroads at another. Auctioneers called specialists controlled the bidding. When a sale was made, clerks would rush details of the transaction by pneumatic tube to the ticker tape room, where typists would relay the news to the world. In the 1920s, the exchange was a place of glamour and wonder.
I started on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange as a page. In 1926, having just graduated from prep school, and I was 16 years old at that time. It was a very exuberant period. I thought it was kind of lively and a lot of fun.
Stocks were becoming a national pastime. Americans bought millions of radios and shares in the company that made them. As cars became popular, so did auto stocks. The demand for stocks pushed prices through the roof. Between 1924 and 1929, the Dow Jones Industrial Average shot up more than 300%.
You had a lot of people in the market that knew nothing about the market except they were going to make some quick money. And the thing was obviously overblown.
Unscrupulous brokers made things worse by pressuring investors into buying questionable stocks.
There was a lot of opportunity for people to believe in what they were being told, and there were a lot of people there willing to take advantage of telling them that this company or that stock or something was going to just really go gangbusters.
Even more dangerous, many investors bought stock on credit, known in the trade as buying on margin.
You could buy stock if you were a good customer for 10% margin. So if you wanted to buy a share of $100 stock, you could put up $10, and the stock itself became collateral for a loan for the other $90.
The widespread use of credit and the tremendous rise in stock prices made some investors wonder how long the good times could last. In 1928, stockbroker Charles Merrill of the firm Merrill Lynch sent a bluntly worded warning to clients.
Now is a good time to get out of debt. We do not urge that you sell securities indiscriminately, but we do advise in no uncertain terms that you take advantage of present high prices and put your own financial house in order. Charles E. Merrill.
Disaster struck Wall Street in October of 1929. Consumer spending on big-ticket items hit a slump, causing several key stocks to decline. The drop sparked a rash of margin calls, where brokers demanded that investors put more cash into their stock market accounts. This was the risk of buying stock on credit. When a stock shrinks in price, it's no longer valuable enough to be collateral for the loan. Investors must put up cash or margin to even the scales. If they don't, their account will be liquidated. October 24th, 1929. Thousands of investors failed to come up with the necessary cash by the time their brokers entered the exchange. When the opening bell rang at 10 a.m., the liquidation sale began.
Well, it started off, as I recall, like a busy day, and pretty soon it got worse and worse.
Suddenly, it appeared that everyone wanted to sell and no one wanted to buy, and there was a sense of frenzy.
The credit binge that had built up the market was suddenly eating through it like a virus. The imbalance between sellers and buyers pushed all stock prices lower, forcing margin calls on other investors and more liquidation. So many shares were sold so quickly that the ticker was running 4 hours late. Thousands of investors flooded the financial district, desperate for news. And suddenly, there was hope. Richard Whitney, vice president of the exchange, met with the nation's top bankers and marched onto the trading floor.
And he walks up to U.S. Steel and says, "What's steel at?" And he says, "200. I'll buy 10,000 shares of steel at 200. And a roar goes up. The big guys are coming in. They're saving us.
Whitney bought $20 million worth of stock in a matter of minutes. It was a powerful symbol.
Recovery, resistance, hope. Don't forget, these people are seeing the whole place fall to pieces. And here's a guy who steps up and starts showing courage.
It turned out Richard Whitney was not trying to save the market, but to fool it so the banks could eventually sell out at a better price. His triumphant stand stopped the panic temporarily, but the downward spiral resumed the following week with a bigger crash and continued for the next 3 years. The drop was staggering. General Electric went from more than $1,600 per share to $154. General Motors, $1,075 to $40. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 89%. $72 billion in investments wiped out.
And people who had their whole life savings tied up in Wall Street vanished. It's out, no more. Zero. A person went from $500 to $15,000, and now he's down to zero.
Economists contend didn't cause the Great Depression that followed. But the public blamed Wall Street. The panic frightened people, and as they stopped spending money, the economy ground to a halt. The crash revealed major flaws in America's unregulated market price for stocks. Now, with the nation in ruins, the federal government was about to impose radical changes in the way the exchange did business. The stock market crash sparked the Depression, but the causes were much broader. They included distressed key industries, an end to the building boom, and bad loans leading to massive bank failures. The stock exchange will continue in a moment on Modern Marvels. Franklin Roosevelt was elected president in 1932 as a reformer. In his very first speech in office, he took aim at the stock market.
There must be a strict supervision of all banking and credits and investments. There must be an end to speculation with other people's money.
On his second day in office, the president ordered the New York Stock Exchange to close for a week. He then pushed through Congress the most sweeping set of financial reforms ever enacted. Banks could no longer gamble on stocks. Brokers must act responsibly, treating their customers' money as if it were their own. And corporations that offered stock to the public must file annual financial reports with the government.
The amount of information people had went up a great deal, and I think eventually that got institutions and individual investors saying, well, we want to buy stocks now because the deck isn't stacked against us. You know, we really have a lot better information than we used to. And so now Wall Street isn't the den of thieves that we used to think it was. It's more of an honest place.
This bill is sponsored.
Richard Whitney, now president of the exchange, spoke against the new regulation, saying the market could police itself. But nothing could stop the president's push for government oversight. Roosevelt created the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, to enforce the new rules. Its first chairman was Joseph Kennedy. The SEC would indict more than 300 people in an effort to clean up Wall Street, although the agency found it virtually impossible to win convictions. The only major figure to go to jail was Richard Whitney himself, convicted of embezzlement. The man who led the market through its deepest crisis spent 3 years in Sing Sing before being released. The newly reformed market was a sleepy place in the 1930s and 40s as a weary public stayed away. Thousands of Wall Street workers lost faith in the paper chase and quit.
You really didn't believe in paper anymore. You wanted to go out and earn your living doing something a lot more concrete.
During World War II, the federal government, not the stock market, generated most of the money needed to reinvigorate American industry. The market generated less than 20%. The war did bring a historic milestone to Wall Street. Women who had worked in the back rooms now appeared on the stock exchange floor, ending a male-only tradition that had lasted 150 years. With victory came the market's most unique wartime contribution, the mountain of ticker tape confetti that welcomed America's troops home. The baby boom years after World War II sparked another major expansion of the American economy. But unlike the 1920s, this boom was fueled by solid investing instead of speculation. Leading the charge was Charles E. Merrill, who opened hundreds of new Merrill Lynch offices in the suburbs.
The whole atmosphere changes. The brokerage house in the past was either for the sleazy characters or the bigwigs. Now it's middle-class Americans. And Merrill says the person we're after is the GI, the ex-GI, with a wife and 3 kids and a Chevy. And that person should own shares. Own your share of America. And it works.
Merrill Lynch offered investment classes for women and placed a How to Invest exhibit in New York's Grand Central Station. Commuters could drop in to see if stocks were right for them.
One of their innovations was to make research reports, which they gave out free to clients and would-be clients, saying, here, here's what our company thinks, it's investigated this company, and here's how we see its prospects.
As American investors returned to stocks, the market finally recovered.
90 quarter, 90 quarter. How's it quoted? 90 to a quarter, 301 on it. 90 quarter. 300.
In 1954, the Dow Jones Industrial Average broke 300. The market had set 25 years earlier, just before the 1929 crash. One of the biggest innovations in the 50s came not from Wall Street, but from a university campus 800 miles away. Economist Harry Markowitz of the University of Chicago developed the theory of stock diversification. Investors, he said, should buy a wide range of stocks to reduce the risk of bankruptcy when a single stock goes bad.
What Markowitz was saying is put your money into lots of different things, and on average you're going to do pretty well. Even though you're never going to be at the top, you're never going to be at the bottom.
Nobel Prize for Economics. In the decades that followed, there were downturns in the market. In the 1960s, there were major slumps prompted by bad news during the Kennedy years and setbacks in the Vietnam War. The OPEC oil embargo hurt stock prices in the 1970s as Americans waited in line for a gallon of gas. But the most dramatic event since the '29 crash was coming soon: the introduction of the computer. The price of a membership seat on the New York Stock Exchange in 1817 was $25. Today, it is over $1 million. Modern marvels will return.
All my life I wanted to do something bigger and better than all the other jokers.
Your motorcycling days are over.
Like hell they are.
Do you think you'll break the record?
Well, I hope so.
Bye, Bert. Good luck.
Welcome to the United States.
Is this a rocket ship? Aren't you scared you'll kill yourself if you crash?
You've got to take a risk now and again, haven't you, son? Yeah, that's what makes life worthwhile.
The World's Fastest Indian, rated PG-13, coming to theaters February 3rd.
What happens if your latest product goes global in a single bound? What happens when new technology overcomes carelessness? What happens if reducing stress reduces accidents too? What happens if your business model changes every 4 hours? At Zurich, we consider all sorts of possibilities. It's why for nearly 100 years we've provided relevant, secure insurance solutions for a changing world. Zurich, because change happens.
Check out what's coming up tonight here on the History Channel.
If you're living with limited mobility, call the Scooter Store today.
For 15 years, we've been telling you how the Scooter Store provides freedom and independence to people with limited mobility. Hi, I'm Doug Harrison. My wife Susanna and I started the Scooter Store because we believe that everyone has the right to enjoy life to the fullest. If limited mobility is restricting your freedom, you have the right to know that a new power chair or scooter can help make you mobile. And you have the right to know that if you qualify, Medicare and your secondary insurance may cover the entire cost of your power chair or scooter. Call the Scooter Store and let our mobility experts help you reclaim your right to independence. If we pre-qualify you for a new power chair or scooter and your claim is denied, the Scooter Store will give you your power chair or scooter free. Regain your mobility and improve your life. Call the Scooter Store now.
Call 1-866-403-2228, 1-866-403-2228.
Merry Christmas, Grandma and Grandpa!
But it's August.
I use my credit card miles. They blacked out the good weeks. While we're at it, happy Thanksgiving. Dibs on the drumstick, old man. Oh, and happy birthdays.
Yippee.
Put your Halloween costumes on while Mommy hides Easter eggs. Hey, you're looking good. Gonna cook that?
For easy-to-use rewards, get Capital One no-hassle rewards with no blackout dates. Check your mailbox.
Dad, I'm hot.
Yeah, we're all hot.
Genius needs a Capital One card.
What's in your wallet?
It's the ultimate DVD set for the ultimate fan. Modern Marvel's technology packs 25 shows into a special collection at special savings. To order, call 1-800-708-1776 or shop historychannel.com. Many of our modern innovations are, in fact, ancient marvels. Next.
We now return to the stock exchange on Modern Marvels. A different kind of panic hit Wall Street in the 1960s. A paper panic. The rise of pension plans and mutual funds pushed the trading volume to 11 million shares per day. Every transaction was still processed by hand.
So you have piles and piles of these papers on desks, and you had a lot of these clerks just moving these papers back and forth. It's not surprising that when you had a lot of volume, you had a crisis.
For brokerage companies, the paper crunch was terrifying. Exhausted clerks were unable to balance the books each night. The New York Stock Exchange had to close on Wednesdays to give clerks a chance to catch up.
The clerks would work around the clock, and every once in a while they'd go on a cot and sleep for an hour and come right back again. They wouldn't go home for weeks.
At its height in 1968, the paper crunch touched off a devastating cash flow crisis, which forced nearly 100 brokerage companies into bankruptcy. Computers solved the problem with their ability to document stock transactions at the speed of light. Since the 1970s, computers have assisted brokers with every aspect of the securities business. They route smaller transactions directly to the trading posts, ending the delay caused by hand-carrying an order across the floor. Computers have vastly improved the market's ability to handle the ever-growing volume of trades. Computers, though, have had a dark side. They were largely responsible for the biggest single-day drop in stock market history. October 19, 1987, the market began a decline that raced out of control. Lightning-fast computers had been pre-programmed to rapidly sell stocks when prices hit a predetermined level.
Just press the button and you sold, which set off something at another computer, and a third computer, and a fourth computer. Now what happened was the volume was tremendous. People couldn't keep up with these things.
The Dow Jones average plunged 508 points, a drop of 23%. The plummet taught traders a lesson. The New York Stock Exchange has installed circuit breaker programs that restrict trading when the Dow fluctuates too rapidly to prevent runaway disasters in the future. This computer in Connecticut has brought the marketplace for stocks to an historic crossroads. This is NASDAQ, built in 1971 by the National Association of Securities Dealers. The NASDAQ system is a quick and inexpensive way to trade without the need for face-to-face encounters. NASDAQ links hundreds of brokerage houses worldwide.
What we're doing is we're replacing the people on the floor congregating in a group, okay, to various people in different houses on the street at their desks, bidding and offering in this box. And everyone has access to what is going on at the same time.
The NASDAQ interactive screen displays 2 columns for every stock. A list of brokers trying to buy shares for their clients along with the price they're willing to pay. And brokers trying to sell stock and the price they're willing to accept. NASDAQ primarily handles stock in America's younger, smaller, high-technology companies. But NASDAQ's phenomenal success is prompting some observers to wonder about the future of the New York Stock Exchange, where shares of larger, more established corporations are bought and sold in a traditional auction. Some economists think the days of face-to-face trading are numbered.
We're always going to need a centralized place. The question is, does it have to be a physical location on Wall Street? You know, it seems to me that technology is changing now so that we can have a centralized market just by looking on our computer screens.
Officials at the New York Stock Exchange maintain there are advantages to their time-tested way of doing business. Most important is the role of the 450 specialists on the floor who act as referees between the 900 brokers and sometimes buy and sell stock on their own to ensure the market keeps functioning during periods of crisis. Whether the future belongs to computers or traditional traders or a combination of the two, stocks seem destined to continue their central role in the global economy. Stock trends now circle the globe 24 hours a day, from the United States to Tokyo to Europe and back to America again. In the U.S., stocks generate tens of billions of dollars of new capital every year. Money to get new companies started and help older ones to expand. The stock exchange is the place where the capital comes from to make capitalism work.
Many of the modern marvels of the last 200 years were actually invented centuries ago by ancient civilizations. Inventions like computers, steam engines, automatic doors are not modern innovations. They are ancient marvels. Next on the History Channel.
If you're close to the money, you know, like an oyster farmer, I eat 100 oysters every week. How many people eat 100 oysters a week? Well, I eat them because they're there. If you're in the business of making money and moving money around and counting money, and it's in the units of trillions, of course you're going to make more money. And then you become so isolated from the real working world of the average person who doesn't have this ability and is struggling to make it, to keep his job, to pay his mortgage, to, you know, feed his kids and send them to school.
It's the best part of my job.
The white shell, no disease.
Making a lot of money is like taking a drug. You feel good head to toe. It is very similar to a drug. When somebody hands you $1 million check or a $5 million check, you want more. Yes. Oh, if I'm making $5 million, I should be making 50 because I'm a genius. No question in your mind that you are a genius, and that the rest of the world owes, you're just so much better than everybody else.
A bottle of beer is £1, but you're having a party, so you need to have 100 bottles of beer. So how much is 100 bottles of beer? One bottle is £1. Tell me, how much is 100 bottles of beer?
100.
No.
Paul Wilmot, ook wel de slimste van alle Quants genoemd. Wiskundige en auteur van vele handboeken. Een kwantgoeroe die al jaren waarschuwt voor het gevaar van een door wiskundigen ingezette ineenstorting van de financiële markten.
You go to a shop and you try and buy 100 bottles of beer, you may get a discount. They may say, okay, for bulk. So one bottle of beer is £1. 100 bottles is not going to be £100. It might be £80. And that's an example of non-linearity. You don't just multiply the 1 by 100. Or it could be that the shop that you're buying the beer from, it's late at night, it's the only shop that's open, they know that you need 100 bottles and they say, oh, I'm sorry, we're only allowed to sell one bottle of beer. But if you give me £200, then okay, you can have 100 bottles. So it might be 80, it might be 200, but it's not going to be 100. And that's the real world. But that's not in 99.9% of finance models.
A quant is somebody who uses quantitative techniques, mathematics, statistics, computer science to try to model the value of financial securities and how to structure them, how to hedge them.
Emmanuel Derman, ook wel de Einstein van Wall Street genoemd, was ooit een kwantpionier die als theoretisch natuurkundige voor Goldman Sachs ging werken. Nu leidt hij nieuwe quants op aan Columbia University in New York.
I moved to this field in 1985 when there really weren't a lot of them, and it was sort of a free-form business. We were all amateurs. Now you can be a professional quant, but in those days quant was sort of a derogatory word. It was a bit like geek, sort of, which is like, I don't know, slang for sort of computer nerds or computer geeks.
There's a lot more respect for quants now. In a decade or so ago, they were seen as these very geeky types who didn't really understand the business. Well, they are the business now.
Manhattan, New York. A beautiful and powerful place where I have a tremendous history and roots, but also a city where money places a heavy hand on daily life, now more than ever. I used to be a computer programmer at a major player on Wall Street that is no longer among us, for obvious reasons. I was creating the plumbing of finance. I would write not the models themselves, but the infrastructure surrounding the models. I could do it sleeping. Some of my coworkers were self-satisfied, complacent, with a lazy state of mind. In my better jobs, I got to sit on the trading floor, which was energizing. Most of my career, I sat in a nondescript cubicle form. But I was physically close to the quants, the structurers of CDOs and similar products, the traders. I saw what they were doing, and I felt attracted. They seemed to be solving difficult problems and working at the center of the action. I felt like I was looking in through a window, watching, yet separate. This really made me want to do the job. The pay is good, too. Just as they view the market itself, different employers have different views on these topics. I don't want our agreement or lack of agreement on these issues to be a factor in my job search. That is why I decided to stay off camera and anonymous.
One of the first ever equations in finance that I derived is still one of my favorites. Beauty is having the right level of complexity, but not too much. The key thing about this is it looks very simple, but having a modulus, an absolute value sign in it, makes it what's called non-linear, and that in itself is very nice. And one of the problems with finance at the moment is almost all the equations you get are linear, which is boring and not realistic.
What financial models do for the most part is ask you for some input, like what will interest rates be in the future, or how volatile will interest rates be in the future, or what will prepayment rates be in the future, and then tell you what something will be worth today or later. And financial models always ask you for some view of the future and then translate that into a price. And so they can't predict things in an absolute sense. They can only predict things given your view of the future. And people call that prediction, but they're putting the input into there.
So in that sense, it's not a correct word, prediction.
Yeah, I don't think it's a correct word. And people like to say that this great financial crisis, global financial crisis that took place, is a consequence of bad models. But I don't think, I mean, there are a lot of things that caused this, but I don't think models are by any means the major part. I think it's much more a question of incentives and the way the whole system works, rather than somebody foolishly relying. I mean, there are people that foolishly relied on models. Nobody can predict with accuracy how people are going to prepay their mortgages in the future, or how many companies are going to default on their bonds. There's always some view that's driving a financial model.
Well, my models, I wrote a piece of software that you brought in all the elements, the mortgages, what your assumptions about defaults and prepayments are. And so when you achieve that sort of golden moment where everything works, it's the numbers are correct, it's easy for the individuals to use, you know, that is a great moment, because you walk down the aisle, you see all the people using your software. You know, they may not appreciate all the work that went into it, but you know, and you see it working. And then in our case, we were able to sell this software to all the major investment banks in the world. I think we sold one to the ABN AMRO was one of our customers, and you know, all the European and Asian banks and the American banks.
Mike Osinski werkte bijna 20 jaar op Wall Street als programmeur van software die slechte hypotheken versneed tot aantrekkelijke financiële producten. Computerprogramma's waar banken miljarden in stopten en waar biljoenen uitkwamen.
But the input into these were all what's called prime mortgages, mortgages to people that had jobs. So they were secure, they were stable, people were making their mortgage payments. It then grew into this vast enterprise, and I guess maybe it started to blossom around the late years of Clinton, and that I left in 2000. After that, it just went nuts. You know, they were issuing subprime mortgages, a lot of subprime. It was a policy of the government. Both Clinton and Bush agreed that the government should force the banks to issue more subprime mortgages, and of course the banks were totally in agreement with that, because they could, on a subprime deal, they would make 100 times the profit that they would on a prime mortgage deal. So they were very eager to issue these kinds of debt. Now, whether the buyers, the end clients for these bonds, really knew what they were buying is a good question.
CDOs actually are a fantastic instrument in the way that they take all these mortgages and package them up, and then you slice and dice so that you've got, each person can take as much or as little risk as you want. Fantastic idea, brilliant idea. If you're going to sell these things, you have to have a really big profit margin, because that profit margin, it may be profit margin, but it also is a margin for error. So it may have a theoretical value of this, but you've got to sell it for this, because this covers possible errors. And once people start competing with each other, the profit margin shrinks. That's what happens when there's competition. mathematics. And then suddenly everybody's buying and selling CDOs, and it becomes the biggest instrument on the planet. And there's no profit margin, there's no margin for error. Combined with quants and quant tools saying, don't worry about it. And then, poof. Here I have to apologize to the planet. I don't know, should I apologize to the planet? I did warn about the dangers in credit derivatives and in mathematical modeling. It is clear that a major rethink is desperately required if the world is to avoid a mathematician-led market meltdown. What you're supposed to do, if you've got a warning, you're supposed to take your warning and write it in book form. You're supposed to write 300 pages about the dangers of etc., etc. I'm a mathematician. And what mathematicians do is they take something that is maybe 300 pages and they try and condense it into one equation. And that to them is beauty.
6:30 a.m. on my way to the library. We'll stay there for the next 12 hours. Today's work: menial computation, abstract manipulation of symbols by hand with a pencil, which could add up to another 25 handwritten pages. I like to learn new things, solve really difficult problems. I like the challenge of representing a portion of reality with logical symbols and systems. I must have been 13 years old when I realized that you could calculate the volume of a bowl by breaking it into smaller and smaller rectangles. The flow of crowds. I like to observe the motion of crowds and sense relations and forces that operate upon them. Heavily trafficked public space. Crowds appear and disappear with the rhythm of the daily schedule. I have the ability to see patterns in abstract mathematical symbols.
What's the obsession with this particular formula?
It was the formula that crashed Wall Street.
As a mathematician, it's a combination of the sublime and the ridiculous, I like to say. Sublime because it's got a lot of beautiful mathematics in them. But ridiculous because ultimately you have to use the thing. So it just relates the probabilities of defaults happening in two different things to the behavior of two companies kind of independently and then via what's called a correlation.
Is it a problem that I don't understand most of what you're trying to explain me?
You don't?
I don't.
Oh, we were really dumbing it down, weren't we?
Yeah, I did.
Oh dear. Suppose you've got one of these CDOs, and the way the CDO works, you've got let's say 1,000 mortgages, and all these mortgages are piled into this contract, and the risk is whatever. The key thing is you've got 1,000 different mortgages. And you have to model these 1,000 different mortgages. And within this copula model, there's an assumption for how these mortgages interact with each other. The relationship between Mrs. Jones' mortgage and Dr. Smith. How many correlations are there in a 2-by-2 combination of these things? The answer is 1,000 times 999 divided by 2, which is approximately 500,000. And how do you know? How do you know what these numbers are, these 500,000 numbers? You don't. So what the copula boys do is they say, let's assume the numbers are all the same. It's too complicated, let's just assume the number is 0.6. That's completely ridiculous. You've got a really complicated model there, you've got these complicated interactions between all these people. So that's from the sublime mathematical modeling to the ridiculousness of just saying they're all 0.6. More senior people in banks don't necessarily have a clue what they're doing, because all these quants have all these multiple PhDs, and the people above are just management types. They won't understand the technical ideas that the quants know all about. And that itself can lead to problems, because if the quant says something, well, what's the manager going to do? The manager just has to believe the quant. And you'll hear stories about quants basing their models on 4 or 5 years worth of data. And you think, 4 or 5? That's not really representative of the economic cycles within the housing market. And what's that going to do for your mathematical models? Because anybody who's over a certain age will know that, well, actually, house prices can very easily fall.
There was a moment, I remember in 2007, I had a friend in the business socially making a social call, and I remember she said the Fed has got to lower interest rates or we're all screwed. And I remember thinking, I sold all my stocks and bonds. You know, and I thought, geez, this is really going to be a lot bigger than people realize. If you look around you, there's a mortgage on every house, there's loans on every car. It's a big market, your credit cards. And if it was failing, you know, they kept issuing debt. People didn't realize. People wanted to believe that everything was always going to go up. I think they were blinded by the amount of compensation that they were getting every year.
They're clean. They're clean. Yeah. Yeah. No, don't bother.
I mean, these are huge numbers. To make millions, $5 million, $10 million, that's a lifetime's worth of money. You don't ever need to work again, and everybody wanted that. You know, I could quit working. This year, I made enough money. In 1 year, I'll never have to work for the rest of my life, and that was the goal of everyone, it appeared to me.
This is money, okay? And Espen's talking about making money. Every year you're making money, and then 1 year you blow up. Now, the difference between this being your money and it being a hedge fund is if this is your money, fantastic, you're making money, you're down here, you're bankrupt. If it is somebody else's money, if it's a hedge fund that does this, every year they're taking a percentage. They're taking some of that as profit, as their bonus, effectively. So they make some of that, they make some more, they make some more. All of this money they're putting into their own bank account. And then, when they lose money, that's their client's money that's lost. It's not their money. So you can see why it's very easy for people to abuse this kind of thing. I think it's fantastic that people who take risk should be compensated for taking risk. But only if they are actually taking risk themselves. Taking risk with other people's money, you should not get compensated for. I'm sorry, I don't know where that fits into economic theory, but taking risk with other people's money does not get rewarded. Sadly, though, it does in this business.
Okay, good. That's enough for now.
What about the white one?
There was a moment when I thought, I questioned why I was ever involved in Wall Street.
Get the ice. I need it right now. On the double. Ice.
That's something I thought that people would be more judicious and more conservative in their lending. And I was involved in it, and I thought, well, wait a second, these guys are out of control totally. The piece of software per se, you know, that's a sort of inanimate object. Yes, people used it, but, you know, if people had used it and put good mortgages into it, it never would have caused a problem at all. But when you put, you know, mortgages that you have a fairly high certainty that people cannot repay, and that half of all the mortgages issued in a given year are that type of mortgages, yes, the industry has gotten out of control. Trillions of dollars a year basically went through that model. These bonds, within 2 and 3 years of being issued, went from AAA to unrated. I mean, just catastrophic collapse. A lot of trading firms that kept these the riskier pieces in their portfolio saw them drop to next to nothing. And given the leverages, the amount of leverage and the amount that the banks had borrowed, they were suddenly in a financial panic.
Saturday after midnight, still studying. I know long hours will not stop when I enter a future job as a quant. Because I was primarily a technologist, I did not fully understand what was going on. I think part of my motivation post-crash for becoming a quant is to gain that understanding, having been through the personal experience of seeing the destruction of my firm. Looked again at my resume that I put out there. The same headhunter called again today to see if I would like to take a job in my former field as a financial technologist. I declined again, of course. No invitation for a quant job yet.
People that are in the business right now probably refuse to talk to the public. If they were to talk to the press, they would be fired. So only a limited few people in the business have the option of talking to the press. Once you're in the world, right, I mean, your phones are ringing, you know, from the moment I woke up in the morning. And I remember, you know, a lot of these guys I knew quite well, and they'd try to wake me up, 6 o'clock. Oh, I thought you were asleep, you know, and you'd be up till 11 o'clock. You have to be wired, you have to be alert every second, you have to be engaged, and you have to be perfect, and you have to be right all the time. You know, the software fails, people lose millions or billions. It can't happen. You can't be wrong. You have to be perfect. It's a lot of stress. My wife was in the business with me. We both would wake up in the morning and describe similar nightmares. Phones were ringing and we couldn't answer them. And then we sort of grew out of that, and we both realized that we didn't know what day of the week it was.
That's Lehman Brothers. It's the new Barclays.
Barclays. Was Lehman.
Was Lehman. Went under.
In London, the FTSE up 1.2%. So is the CAC in Paris.
Hey, Joel. Oysters.
Banking has completely lost touch with its purpose, its original purpose, and is now becoming dangerous. It used to be that when some of these derivatives were first invented, they were to help a farmer, for example, hedge the value of his crop. So he wasn't speculating on the price of wheat, he was busy growing it. Now there are more people trading these commodity derivatives than are actually involved in the production of the commodity, which is completely bizarre. I know quite a lot of people in this business who are feeling a bit jaded now. People are starting to ask questions. My nice friends are starting to ask questions about their role in society. You may be making lots of money, but is it something to tell your grandchildren? Oh, I was a banker. I was there when I caused the 2008-2009 crisis, etc. What are they actually doing with their lives? Or just moving this money around? This isn't necessarily such a business to be proud of.
I think that's probably plenty. 30, 35 pounds.
Responsibility is just not a one-way street. When it's successful, you're responsible. Well, you can't be unresponsible when the same item is a failure. You have to have some type of responsibility. I mean, I could say I wasn't, but I was involved. I made a very comfortable living, and I was proud of what I had done. I myself never saw this kind of debacle.
Pretty big muscles, you see. They're a little wilder. This is they're yellow on the inside too. Different color. A chef in the city loves this wild taste, I only do it for one chef, because if I did too many, there wouldn't be enough,
The model is Hippocratic Oath. I will remember that I didn't make the world, and it doesn't satisfy my equations. Now that's obviously that's about having a mature appreciation that whatever you do, that the models are never going to be perfect. I will never sacrifice reality for elegance without explaining why I have done so. So it's a competition between the real world and the elegant world of mathematics, and sometimes the real world is just dirty. Nor will I give the people who use my model false comfort about its accuracy. Instead, I will make explicit its assumptions and oversights. Quants are asked the following by some trader. They're saying, well, look, you've just measured the risk in this portfolio. It's too big. Okay, Quant, back to the drawing board. I want you to redo your numbers and come up with a smaller risk. It doesn't mean change the portfolio. It means change the maths to make it look less risky. People can use the models to hide risk. Though I will use models boldly to estimate value, I will not be overly impressed by mathematics. People make finance too mathematical. So mathematical that many people who have to implement the models don't understand what's going on. And once you have too much mathematics, it's difficult to see where the mistakes are. I understand that my work may have enormous effects on society and the economy, many of them beyond my comprehension. So this is a serious business, this is what it's saying. The quantitative finance, banking has become so enormous, it's outstripped all other businesses. And really it should just be a service for these other businesses, rather than everybody is now working to essentially service the banks, is what it feels like. It's completely changed the nature of the world, all this banking. There we go. So there's a nice little picture in the book of me and Emmanuel Dermond with our Karl Marx beards on, because obviously the inspiration was a kind of communist manifesto. You combine the Communist Manifesto with the Hippocratic Oath, and this is what you've got.
When I first came to the field, I was sort of optimistic about using quantitative methods on the financial markets, and I don't think they're useless, but I'm trying to think how to say it. I don't think you can use quantitative methods to explain markets either. People like Bohr or Einstein or Schrödinger or Feynman discovered things that seem to be God's truth almost, even if they're not 100% accurate. And I don't think that's possible in finance. I sort of think it's an illusion. The world, the financial world and the world of people is changing the whole time. History doesn't repeat itself, whereas in physics, history repeats itself all the time. You can do the same experiment over and over again. So, I don't know, somewhere after 5 or 6 years in the field, I began to realize that it wasn't the same thing as doing physics. In physics, if you wake up in the morning and think of an equation or think of some theory, you actually have a small hope in hell that you might actually be right. But in finance, if you write down some set of assumptions and you look at yourself honestly, it may be useful, but you know it's not going to be right in some absolute sense. Because you're dealing with people, and people don't work that way.
Another weekend, trying to remember all the parts of the city I haven't seen since I started the course. Longing to visit art galleries, eat out every night, to live. The day at the library seemed to have more hours than the normal 12. Studying alone, with other people doing the same thing, I feel like a monk in a monastery. It's peaceful. The library is quite old. Sometimes we have to cover the air conditioner with old Soviet mathematical journals from the 60s. Once I dreamt of doing pure science, working on rocket ships, working at a small startup company. There has to be a way to be creative as a quant, too, like designing new financial products and the math to price them.
Do you think it's always possible for people to express a worry they have about the things they're building or writing?
It's possible. People may not listen to them in the end. Most of these people are employees. People don't always listen to you. But yeah, it's possible to do it. And I think people should do it. And I think people who use the model should understand that. But I don't honestly believe that the models are responsible for what happened in the world. I think what's responsible for what happened in the world is that there've been an increasing number of crises since 1990, financial crises in the world since 1994, and every time people are used to constant growth and acceleration, and every time it slowed down, the government stepped in and tried to stimulate it again by lowering interest rates just like they're doing now. And so you get these sort of a rise and a collapse, and then people don't like the collapse, so they lend money cheaply and force a rise again. And each time the oscillations get bigger and bigger, and they're doing exactly the same. I have no idea what's the right thing to do, but they're doing exactly the same thing now, which is trying to stimulate the economy every time it looks like it stops growing fast.
It shocks me that, as a person who runs many businesses, that we can talk about an economy shrinking by 1%. It's awful. Growing by 1% is fantastic. There's a difference of 2%. How can that difference of 2% have such a big impact on the world around us? 1% plus or minus in my businesses, I won't notice. The economists, they think that they're scientists. So they come up with these, what they call laws. They're not laws. Laws of gravity, that's a law. Anything that Isaac Newton comes up with is a law. But when an economist comes up, it's just a framework, an idea. It may work, it may not. Sometimes it does. That's not a law. But they think they're laws. And so they build up this whole edifice of theory based upon this very shaky foundations. And they get all sorts of nonsense coming out of it.
Rinse these off.
Uh-oh.
I think that the natural world is something you learn to appreciate through a struggle. In the financial world, you know, money is a man-made phenomenon, right? It's like a game, right, where you make the rules. Well, money is a game that people make the rules for. But out there, the day-to-day activity is not about making money. The day-to-day activity is trying to grow an animal, a healthy animal, or a group of healthy animals. That's a big difference.
That is beautiful, believe it or not. That is beautiful. The beautiful thing about this is it says that in the risk-neutral, now I've got to keep emphasizing, this is the risk-neutral version, where mu equals r. If it was the real world, if this was the real version, it would have some d mu dt's in it. Now let's do some manipulations. Now some of these manipulations are straightforward. 6 over z, in which case there are no z's in there at all, if you see what I mean. The d by d big T version, because we are trying to find the stochastic differential equation, not for log z, so you're going to end up with mu minus a half, sigma squared. Let me backtrack a wee bit here. And we have a stochastic differential equation for z, then we can also write down the stochastic differential equation for f. There was a very, very short period of time when quants were in the doghouse, so to speak. The people were saying that, oh, banking has changed forever, quants have finished, there'll be no more of these credit instruments. And I said, you know, hang on a second, guys, you really don't know your history. You don't know human nature. This will all blow over in a matter of months. And of course, we're back to the big bonuses. Everything goes back to as it was. If people don't complain now, then it serves them right when the next financial crisis happens.
12 hours to go before the evening classes start. I feel united with my classmates by the enormous workload.
It's actually the fees that we're trying to maximize, right? Of course, we have to maximize returns. We have to do a good job in managing their money, otherwise we're going to do pretty poorly at collecting those fees.
I wanted to feel challenged again and enrolled in a Quants program. It cost me $60,000 tuition, which means more debt that I now have to take on.
The incentive fee structure basically means that maximizing the TWR is like maximizing fees. Think about that. That's kind of tricky.
This course is 1.5 years full-time. 1.5 years, no salary, expenses living in downtown Manhattan, plus paying full-time tuition. So no alcohol for me, not a drop, at least till the end of the first semester. I can't afford to lose a day to a hangover. Hardly any social life for the time being. Most of the other students are Asian or East Europeans. Math is their first language and our common language. We Americans are the minority.
Maximizing the number of times that we're going to penetrate the previous high water mark, we're actually maximizing incentive fees. So you can see that this type of optimization is very hedge fund-like. Does everybody get it so far?
Used to be the physicists were splitting the atom. Who's splitting the atom these days? Building bridges. Who are the people building bridges? Everybody wants to move into this field. Scientific creativity is becoming financial creativity, which is all a bit bogus. Quants are essential to modern banking because so much of it is based upon new techniques, like the latest thing is the algorithmic trading, the high-frequency trading, for which you need math skills.
It used to be, historically, you just have like floor traders and brokers, screaming and shouting down on the floor of exchanges and trading stocks, and the order came down and they would run up and they sort of muscle their way out and wear different colored jackets, the classic pictures we've all seen.
Matthew Goldstein, onderzoeksjournalist voor persbureau Reuters, die als een van de eerste de gevolgen van het high-frequency trading aankaartte.
The reality is so much of this doesn't even take place there. I mean, that's becoming such a lesser part of trading and what goes on. It goes on in the back rooms, and it goes on in these modelings where these programs are put together by computer geeks, basically.
So high-frequency trading is just about taking all this data, analyzing it very, very rapidly, and then putting on trades that may last milliseconds.
What worries me the most is I was disturbed to hear that some firms get faster access to the markets than other people. I forget what they call it now, but people get like a tenth of a second advantage, big firms, which I think is unfair.
Hedge funds try and get the black boxes as close to an exchange as possible, because it takes time for the signal to get from the black box to the exchange to buy or to sell. Now, of course, that is dictated by the speed of light. Now, we're talking about trading at the speed of light. The classic crash was the 19th of October 1987 crash. That happened within a day. Or the big move, the 20% fall in the S&P 500 was within a day. The next crash could be within minutes.
So what is a black box?
A black box is just something that has inside some kind of formula, maybe secret or maybe not, that takes in lots of data. And the data might be stock prices, it might be other information, and it tells you what to trade, what to buy and sell. My favorite is Google search terms, trading based on what people are searching for.
It's not a black box in the sense that, if you saw the algorithms, you could you and me might not be able to figure it out, but wiser minds maybe could, and computers can certainly read it. So it's a black box in the sense that it's almost hard for the human mind to get their arms or wrap themselves around to really understand what's going on. And people have said for years that Goldman itself is a black box, because we don't really know how it makes all this money and the billions of dollars and the big bonuses we hear about. The New York Stock Exchange is building this big facility out in New Jersey, which is right near New York, and basically it's being built for high frequency traders, so they can have their equipment very close in a very tightly knit factory, essentially, to do high frequency trading. Well, who gets to have their server where? Is there going to be a lottery? Does someone pay more to get closer? I mean, it's sort of absurd when you think about it. This is what it's come down to. The battleground is ultimately going to be who has the most resources, who can pay the best salaries, the hire the best brains. And in reality, we're talking maybe about a dozen or so really top players. You know, and not everyone can be a customer of Goldman Sachs. Not everyone can be a customer of Morgan Stanley or, you know, Barclays.
Also, it does, the high-frequency trading means people are more concerned with the price of something and not its value. Value means what it's really worth. Price is just what people buy and sell for. And if you buy something now, sell it a second or two later, all you care about is the price you sold it for is greater than the price you bought it for. Its actual value, who cares?
It sort of flies in the face of what we sort of think about what the markets are really about. The companies themselves almost don't matter, and what they do doesn't matter. It's just the fact which way their stocks move is all that matters. And what's sort of frightening about it that I've seen from the standpoint is the systemic risk that might be involved, that so much of this trading just takes automatically and just takes place so quickly that the human element gets more and more divorced from it. I mean, the human beings are obviously responsible for writing the programs, but there's no human being interstepping between these trades. And we saw this a year ago with United Airlines. There was a false bankruptcy rumor. Some wire service inadvertently had transmitted an old story about a UAL bankruptcy filing. The problem was all these news-reading algorithms saw that and immediately started sell, sell, sell. In a matter of minutes, United Airlines stock is cut in half. That is clearly a case where the computers have gone wild.
Banking is taking over the entire planet and is having such a major impact on the man in the street, and it really should not. You know, banking is supposed to be to take money from people with too much to give to people with too little who maybe want to start a business, they've got a business idea, but that's not what banking is about anymore. Banking is just about gambling on these numbers, not realizing that behind these numbers there are human beings with jobs.
There's always been a joke about the New York Stock Exchange becoming a museum at some point, and they'll just have it for like a show there and people running around. And this is the way we used to trade stocks, you know, and isn't it so quaint and everything? At the same time, one can argue, though, that if there's this big backlash in high-frequency trading, we may see a revival to some form of human element inside, that people may say, you know, as flawed as human beings are, we don't want to give everything over to the machines either.
Just walked past a crowded Wall Street full of Chinese tourists, asking me if this was the actual stock exchange. Wall Street as a location is not any longer what it was. Many banks moved their front offices uptown and their back offices to newer and cheaper spaces in New Jersey. Now Deutsche Bank is the only major firm left on Wall Street proper. Nearby is Goldman Sachs, with no name on the door, also about to move. There are almost no large firms headquartered in the neighborhood that was the cradle of American finance. Only the New York Stock Exchange remains. Its facade, one of the most iconic symbols of global capitalism.
I'm always trying to encourage young people to do what I'm doing. I mean, it's a young person's, you know, it's pretty physically intensive.
They really haven't grown that much. I may not make it till Christmas here.
You know, I like a bigger, we typically sell a much bigger oyster, right?
What do you find more satisfying?
Well, software is a much more mental, you know, the pleasure, the mental exertion is pretty intense. Like 1 million lines of software is a lot, and you have it all memorized, right? And there's the pleasure of like a Scrabble, doing that kind of word puzzle kind of thing. Although it's not that healthy. You sit in front of a machine, you have the terminal face effect, you know. it's not the same as this.
Oh,
You know, this is pretty.
not good.
I mean, a day like today is pretty idyllic, right? You're just out in the water, a nice feeling, bringing food in. So I think we sell about 150,000 oysters, which is that's $100,000. You know, of course, I live off interest. You know, so I don't. This is nice to have. I make some pocket money, et cetera, et cetera. And the overhead here is pretty small. You have to come to grips with nature. Like these oysters should be bigger. Every year, the ones that I pick in September and October are ready by November. Why they aren't, I don't know, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Where in software, you can do something about everything. You can modify, you can make, you know, this virtual world, you can make what you want. Here, you know, you have to live constrained by, you know, the real world.